Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and you might be sick of seeing me because I've uploaded a lot of videos recently, but I wanted to get my December wrap-up out as soon as possible so I could fully focus on 2020. So the month of December was a little bit hectic. I had in December, and I was determined to cover the whole indie board, and I also had the Book Junkie Trials Winter Quest, which I did complete, but then forgot to upload my completed titles, so I didn't even get any of the points for it. So anyway, I also struggled just to keep my stress levels down, and I'm usually a very big holiday person, but this December it just felt strange. So I skipped a lot more reading than I usually do, and I opted for a lot of the easier reads than I usually do. But with all that in mind, I feel like I still did pretty well. So let's jump right in. First up, I read Libraries for Writers by Sarah Perry. This is a very short, 40-some pages nonfiction novel, or I guess just book, all about how you as an indie author can get your work in a library. Things like what libraries look for in the cover and on the spine, because it is very important to have words on the spine, and editing standards, and how to get it in, and other things you can do with your library if they don't accept your book and that kind of thing. And I am not currently an indie author, maybe one day, but I do want to get a lot more indie books in my library, so I was looking at it from a what books have I read will fit this criteria and therefore be the best options to suggest to my library, have the highest chances of getting accepted. I have not heard back from the ones I suggested so far, but it took a really long time the last time, so I'm still hopeful. Now, if you are an indie author and you're like, I would love to see my book in a library, definitely check this one out. If you don't want to get indie books in libraries, it's pretty pointless for you. It's a very niche subject, but for what it was, I thought it was super helpful. Up next, I read Late Night Partners by Fennel Stewart. This is a vampire novella all about a young man and his great uncle, and said great uncle is attacked in the middle of the night and pretty quick realizes it's a vampire. And shortly thereafter, a strange woman shows up who says that she might have some insider information on what exactly that attack was all about. And I loved this book for the allegory because from my maybe too much of an English teacher analysis, it read like an allegory for vampirism as the gentrification of Black neighborhoods. Pretty much almost all of our characters, both protagonists and antagonists, are people of color, with like a couple exceptions. And they even discuss things like, oh, are we trying to keep certain skin pigments away and that kind of thing. And there's also some characters that are using vampirism and turning people whether or not they wanted because they believe that it would make society better. And I just loved that allegory and how gentrification is kind of like a new form of decadence, which is a standard symbol that vampires have represented for a while. So it was kind of like a modern take on a classic analysis. And on top of that, there was this strange heartbeat of the world that Doris talked about at one point, and the reveal of what that was very surprising. Now, I feel like it might have wrapped up a little too quickly for me. However, it is the first in a series, so I assume things will be carrying on into future books. I am open to reviewing those future books if the author sees fit, or I might just buy them myself and not review. I don't know. It's all up in the air at this point. Up next was Space Team by Barry J. Hutchinson. This was one that I actually kind of asked for from another booktuber because I was doing the Book Junkie trials, and one of them was to get a request or a book that you found from a booktuber. I never actually ended up like submitting any of the books I read, so I didn't get any points for completing it, but I completed it. And this one was suggested to me by Scott from Bookish Invasion, and I see why he suggested it because it is a very hilarious space opera all about this con man who gets mistaken for this horribly cannibalistic serial killer and is promptly taken from Earth to join this space suicide squad, more or less, to go on this mission with all of these other horrible criminals. And it's very funny. He puts the word space in front of everything. Our protagonist refers to things like, well, you should space Google it. It's great. At certain points, it felt like the story was relying too much on quips and funny moments as opposed to plot, and it kind of felt like at certain times the story didn't care. But then it wrapped it up at the end, and the end felt much more heartfelt and much more earnest. And also it had this little like globby shape-shifting character that kind of reminded me of Morph from Disney's Treasure Planet, so I loved it. And in general, this is one of those books where you definitely have to like that kind of book to like it, but if you do, then you'll love it. Up next was Hunter Shan Rising Storm by J.T. Harris. I'm still not sure how to pronounce the protagonist's name, although I guess she's only one of many protagonists. This is the sequel in the Prince Norrell series. I reviewed the first one a while ago, and this is still all about a young and unannounced prince who has this strange power straight from a deity stuck inside him and is technically illegal for him to have, and now, big baddies are chasing him down for it. In the first book, he ends up at a boarding school and meets new friends, and obviously I don't want to say much more than that because I don't want to spoil it, but this one, while it did feel really slow in pacing a lot of the time, like characters in this book were just finding out about the inciting incident from the last book and we're like, yeah, we all know this. There was a lot more into the world building. There was a lot more in the creation of character relationships. New characters were added. Perspectives that low-key I think should have been in the first book, but it's fine, they're here now. So there's a lot more character perspectives and more in-depth look at the world. And I can't say much more about the plot, but it does amp up the conflict. I just wished it moved a little bit more quicker and a little bit less time explaining things to everyone when the reader already knows them. Kind of that, so-and-so explain the situation and then move on, as opposed to seeing that explanation in the text. But beyond that, still a really good read. Definitely going to be continuing on with this series. It's probably one of my favorite YA fantasies right now, which is really strange for me because I don't usually read that genre. But the characters are just so endearing. And even in their pig-headedness, it's really cute. There's the grumpy old master character that I just love. So I would highly suggest this one. I will have the reviews for both this and the first one down in the description, because obviously you don't really want to watch the review for the second one if you haven't read the first. So check this out if you want yourself some good indie YA fantasy. Up next, more indie YA fantasy, and that is The Hunted by Pip Coombs. This is about a young boy, I guess he's more of a young man, who realizes that he has magical powers and must travel to this school to learn about them. And I believe he is like 17 at the beginning of this. And this Loki felt like YA Harry Potter. And I feel weird at saying that because my interactions with the Harry Potter fandom have been very roundabout, i.e. watching some of the movies and then being in the classroom while teachers read the books aloud. So I can't say that's fully substantiated as a claim, but if you have read this one, I think you'll like this. There's a very good group dynamic. We have two perspectives, and I believe the second perspective is supposed to be like the super smart one. We have a prophecy of a chosen prince who is going to come back and not necessarily save everyone. And that's what really drew me in. And the premise is this idea that he could like save everyone and beat back the vampires on this island that are terrorizing everyone, or he could fail and everyone could die. And that's what brought me into it, was this idea of it's not a given that the prophecy is going to turn out well. And I'd love to see more prophecies like that. However, as I have found out, or rather had my suspicions confirmed, I'm not the biggest fan of magical boarding schools. Certain leaps in logic just are beyond my realm of suspension of disbelief. Certain very dangerous things that the teachers let the students do that I can't quite believe, when I can't even, let a student be near a door unless I'm with them at the school I work at. It's hard to believe that they can just go walking around this accursed lake that could steal your soul if the water even touches you. So if you love that kind of magical school, teachers kind of let students do really dangerous things for the sake of learning magic, you'll definitely love this one. For me, I probably won't be continuing with this series. However, I am glad that I have something like this to suggest to other people who do like that stuff, because not every book has to be a 5-star to be important. Up next was my big, emphasis on big, guilty pleasure read, and that is Children of Lilith by Lauren Devora. This was my pick for over 500 pages in December, and it is a super, super angsty paranormal romance all about this young woman who is attacked by vampires but is saved by this strange, super brooding dude who's got a past, and maybe he's an alcoholic. And she discovers that she may have something strange and may be the key to helping these vampire hunters take down their enemies. It's very long. Despite the fact that it's long, it doesn't take place over that much time. I think like the entire plot of this 530-page book is like maybe a week tops. And that was very strange to me. But it is CW TV shows levels of angsty, and I waffled between, oh, my heart, and what is this emo sad boy nonsense? I couldn't quite decide which one I landed on. Our male protagonist, Griffin, is so super angsty, and I can't let her love me. I don't deserve to be loved. And props, our protagonist, Nikki, was very hands-on, even when she thought she was just a human. She had a lot of agency. She made a lot of decisions. She called Griffin out on a lot of stuff, which I liked. I think I gave this book 4 stars. I'm not sure. But if you love that kind of overly angsty, dramatic, paranormal romance, you'll probably love this one. It is the first in a duology, I believe, and there is a pretty solid found family-esque format, so that went pretty well. And it was just nice. It was very good for a good, not lighthearted, but easy read despite the long page count. Up next is a book I'm so happy I decided to read because it was a literal last-second decision. I hadn't found a book to read for my non-Western inspired prompt. So I went looking through my ebooks and I realized that I had downloaded this off BookBub forever ago, and that is The Quiche by Antoine Bandelet. I loved the idea of this book. It is all based on African folklore, specifically is it Andola or Angola? Editing Margaret. Thank you. All about this young man, older man actually, who is coming to this village seeking this elder that he wants to learn from because he has some things in his past that he wants to take care of and move beyond. And while he's there, these strange creatures called the Quiche begin attacking. And I loved these monsters. They are so different than anything else I've ever read in fantasy, and that's because of their background, of the culture they came from. The Quiche are essentially these men that have hyena faces on the back of their heads. They must always hide with hair. And when they go full Quiche, they're like these weird beings where they're like almost cut in half, where their front halves are like the Quiche with these impenetrable hides, and their back half ends up being the human half. Like they all twist around, and you can't bite the Quiche half. You have to try to like catch them in the back in the human half. It's so intriguing. These monsters were so different than anything else that I'd ever read, and I loved it. I actually ended up in a conversation with the author because he has a last name that I could not find the pronunciation of to save my life. Seriously, that howtopronounce.com gave me like 5 different pronunciations. So finally I just messaged him and I was like, hey, I'm going to be talking about your book in a video and I don't want to butcher your name. Can I get your name? So he asked me why, and long story short, I am now going to review a book from him about African sky pirates sometime this year, and I'm super excited because that premise just sounds fantastic. And this is why you always ask for pronunciations. Not only does it keep you from looking like a jerk and mispronouncing someone's surname, you're making some awesome connections. Up next was me reading in response to something from the community. So if you're not aware, certain very popular authors, well, just one really, was making some more turfy comments. And so I'm like, hey, let's show some love to trans authors. And so I did a trans authors taste test, reading the first chapter of 4 different books, all written by trans authors, and then picked one to read fully. And the one I picked was The Dragon Pearl by Yoon-ha Lee. This is a space opera all based on Korean folklore about a young girl whose brother goes missing and is believed to have deserted his post in Space Forces. Min knows that he would never do that. He loves the Space Forces and he wants to help their home planet. So she decides she's going to chase after him. Now it's believed that he deserted to find the Dragon Pearl, this mysterious artifact that will help terraform planets, and their home planet of Jinju is not doing well. Our protagonist is what is called a fox spirit, and she has a lot of powers, and that was probably my biggest issue with this. The one thing that kept it from being a full 5-star is that her powers were such that she could basically get out of any problem without much struggle. Her ability to charm on the fly and convince people of almost anything, it didn't really mesh well with the conflict. It didn't really make the stakes feel real. And also, it kind of like hinted at, oh, she could overexert herself and use so much of her powers, but it never showed that fully. You never really saw her being without them. But I loved the fact that we had a space opera so steeped in its culture, and at certain points it almost read like military sci-fi for mid-grade, and I loved that as well. So it's just a great pick. I think a lot of people have this one as their favorite of the Rick Riordan Presents series, and I'm a big fan of everything that Rick Riordan has done for, you know, people of color or people who have different gender identities and that kind of thing. So I probably will read more of his series. And despite the OP protagonist, I would highly suggest this one as well. So the rest of the month was all about me trying desperately to get to 150 books. I was so close, and I knew that I was going to forever be annoyed at myself if I couldn't get to 150 books read in 2019. So I pulled out the graphic novel. That's right. This is American Born Chinese by Jean Luen Yang. And this is a graphic novel centered around being an American-born Chinese person. We have 3 different stories. One about an old fable about the Monkey King from Chinese folklore. One about this boy who has a cousin that seems to be constantly popping up and giving him hell with all of his very stereotypical Chinese mannerisms. And one about this boy who wants to be part of his culture but has a crush on the all-American girl and the fallout of that. And all 3 stories wrap up together nicely at the end. Obviously, I cannot tell you whether or not the rep is accurate. I am not from that demographic. However, it is Own Voices, and according to the reviews, there are other Own Voices, other Chinese Americans that have stated that this was representation that was well done, so I'm going to go with them. The art style is very stylistic, and I really liked that. And again, it's a graphic novel, so it was a quick read, and I'm really glad that I stumbled across this at a flea market. What else do you read when you want to amp up your book count without reading a lot or reading very hard? You pull out the Meth Market paperback romance novels. This is My Lady Housekeeper by Jean Savory. And no, I didn't really remember the title of this because, again, this is a book I read in a day, mostly just to pad out my reading count. So this is a Regency romance all about a young woman who cannot access her inheritance from her father unless she is married, but she refuses to marry, so she takes up place in this old out-of-the-way hunting lodge. But then a hunting party comes, and she decides that she's going to pretend to be the housekeeper, and then there's murder. It was a very sharp left turn. But I will appreciate that we had very strong female friendships in this one. Our protagonist actually ends up forming a fierce bond with a woman who used to be a courtesan, as she calls herself, or a prostitute. And so I loved that aspect of having a character that had that background, being treated very fairly and having a round, complex character. But more than that, everything else was basically the same. I think this was published in like 2004, so like there's only so much you can expect of this, and I bought it for like $1, maybe a little bit more than that, at a used bookstore, and I read it in a day, so I can't ask for more than that. And the third book in the trifecta of what do I read when I just want to get to a certain number of books read, what else do? You hit up the super short ebooks that you downloaded for free, and this one was Extreme Medical Services by Jamie Davis. The premise of this was really intriguing to me. It is about a paramedic service that specifically treats what they call unusuals aka supernatural creatures. I loved this idea. You had a vampire that gets an allergic reaction when he tries to put glitter on his skin to help his girlfriend live out her Twilight fantasies. You have a siren character that has asthma. It was really intriguing at first. The one issue I had going into it was you could pretty much tell from like the first 50 pages that our author is an actual paramedic. And the reason I say you could tell that was because there was so much medical jargon that I didn't really care about. We would get an entire paragraph of these medical terminologies and making the IV and all that kind of stuff to treat a vampire. But, like, I didn't care about that medical jargon. I wanted a little bit more of a plot because at first it kind of read like a series of short stories, which is valid for this format. You can have like a series of short stories, and then as you go, a plot develops. And the plot did develop kind of. At first, I thought the plot was all about how our protagonist's partner might low-key be in an abusive relationship with the vampire. But then it's like a left turn, and now it's, okay, there might be a hate group. But the problem was that our protagonist, when faced with things, it was very obvious that he was doing things not because they made the most sense for him to do as a character, but because the plot would be resolved too quickly if he didn't do them. Secrets that he kept that, like, made no sense to be kept. Like, that person asking you to keep that secret does not have more of your trust than the person you really need to tell that secret to. And I'm trying not to spoil it here because it is still an interesting idea, and if you are intrigued in being a paramedic or any of that kind of era of the medical services, you might find that really interesting. I feel like this is kind of an instance of, if you really want to know the nitty-gritty, you'll love it. But for me, if you just want to see vampires in the back of an ambulance, it's not as intriguing. So I probably won't be continuing with this series, but at least I know now. At least I have yet another book off of BookBub done, and more importantly, I got to 150 books read in 2019. I have no illusions that I am going to reach that number again this year, but it was nice to know that I got there. So that is it, my December 2019 wrap up. This has run a little bit longer. I didn't realize how long I was going to talk about each book, but for all that it was crazy and for all that we had so much to do and so many Christmas celebrations to go to, I am really happy with how December turned out. And I'm hoping to maybe step up my game a little bit moving forward. I mean, I got a fancy new bullet journal, and I gotta live up to that fancy bullet journal life. With nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous 2020.